Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm going to share some thoughts and theories I have about the Batman, obviously that being the Matt Reeves, Robert Pattinson Batman movie. Obviously, like, if you have not at this point in time seen the teaser trailer, I'll include a link to it in the description down below, but I'm pretty sure if you're coming across it, you've most likely seen it by now. But obviously, I've watched it multiple times, and obviously I've talked about the trailer before, but now it's just like, you know, sitting down, you know, having seen it multiple times, so much stuff is rushing through my head that I just want to make a video just kind of, you know, discussing some of the stuff kind of flowing through my head, and obviously picking up a little bit from here and there. I've heard, you know, people's reactions and, you know, thoughts about it and stuff like that, and kind of formulating my own thoughts about everything. So bear with me because I'm probably going to be a little all over the place, so I do apologize. But first and foremost, one thing I'm walking away from this trailer curious about, because obviously it's a teaser trailer. The movie's not even done yet. Only like, what was it, like 20 or 25% of the movie's only that much of it's filmed. A lot of productions had to shut down and stuff like that. Regardless, one thing I walked away from this trailer, like, I'm curious what Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne is going to be like. Obviously, we got more Batman in the trailer than we, I mean, I'm sure for a lot of people, that's what you want. And, you know, and that's what I want too. But also, you know, because I've talked about this in a video a while back, I used to not really care too much about secret identity. It's like, I don't care about the boring aspects of your life. I just want the superhero stuff all the time. But now that I've gotten older and stuff like that, over the years, I've come to appreciate the secret identity aspect, that human nature balance between being the hero and, you know, trying to live a somewhat normal life. But the point I'm making is, I'm curious what kind of Bruce Wayne Robert Pattinson is going to be, because, like, obviously, and this is, to me, is something I've talked about in the past too, I thought was always kind of interesting about DC. The way people kind of explained it to me in the past, and I always kind of latched onto it, is their superhero personas are who they really are. So in the case of Bruce Wayne, Batman is who he really is. He just wears the mask of Bruce Wayne. That it's, you know, it's like your real identity is your superhero persona, that your secret identity is the mask that you put on. You know, kind of a great example would be like Superman. Like, Superman created the persona, like, he is Clark Kent for the purposes of letting you not figure out, oh, Clark Kent is Superman. He wears the glass, he's so like fumbling and kind of like, oh, because the whole point is to make him seem so unassuming that it's like you'd never think Clark Kent is actually Superman. I actually think it's actually interesting, because I was thinking about it, like, Man of Steel kind of does that backwards, because he's already technically Superman beforehand, and it's like he crafts the persona of Clark Kent after the fact. I mean, maybe that technically always ends up happening, but it's just, like, more often than not when it comes to Superman stories, he's already he's Clark Kent, you meet that, and then you get the Man of Steel side of, you know, things of him as Superman. But it's like, I think it's interesting how they did it, you know, in Man of Steel, because obviously, you know, Lois meets him at the end of Man of Steel, and he's got the glasses on, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm working at Daily Planet now, you know, that whole situation. But going back to it, like, I'm curious, like, is Robert Pattinson's Batman or Bruce Wayne going to be playing it up as like, oh, I'm like, oh, the rich playboy? Like, is he going to lean into that? Or is, you know, because this is supposed to be Batman maybe second year, so, like, you know, it also depends on how long he's been back in Gotham since creating the persona of Batman. Like, has he been back a while and then he crafted, you know, Batman, or did he come back at the same time Batman popped up? But it's like, because, you know, the whole playboy angle is meant to people be like, oh, playboy douchebag Bruce Wayne? There's no way in hell. You know, Bruce Wayne is selfish. He's running his large company. There's no way in hell he's someone like Batman who's seeking justice. So it's kind of meant to disarm people so they won't think that. But obviously we didn't get that much of a time with Bruce Wayne. So, but I'm curious, is that how he's kind of crafted that persona? Or, you know, once again, this is second year Batman, and depending on how long he's been Batman, like, maybe that line is a little frailer than it normally is. Maybe he hasn't strengthened his persona to be like, all right, I gotta lean into this whole, like, you know, playboy aspect. Like, that's why I'm really curious too, is like how he, you know, how Bruce Wayne is going to be approached in this movie in that regard. Is he going to be like dark and brooding, and then eventually he's like, no, I gotta craft this persona of like, hey, so people don't realize put two and two together. You know, it's like, I gotta lean into being kind of a D-bag so people don't suspect anything. I'm curious about that, you know, because I think that's gonna be an interesting, I think that in itself could speak volumes, and just like how, because if he isn't that Bruce Wayne, you could seeing him become that Bruce Wayne could be an interesting kind of subplot to the movies, like I said, because he could be just he could be just as dark and brooding as Bruce Wayne as he is Batman, you know? So I'm curious to see how they would handle that. Another aspect to this is the whole situation with Riddler, which I think is interesting, because obviously the whole thing, and a lot of people have kind of pointed this out, that obviously Riddler is making this whole point of like going after the corruption of Gotham. I mean, obviously, like, it's like, oh, corruption and Gotham sadly goes hand in hand. It's kind of like, at this point in time, you're like, oh, I'm not surprised. But the fact of the matter is, it seems like Riddler is attacking and killing people for the purposes of trying to make a statement of just like, look at the corruption in, you know, this city. Because he says this line, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's basically like, what was it? The quote is like, if you are justice, then what is the price for your blind eye? Like, how much will it take for you to kind of turn a blind eye to justice? Because I'm sure it's kind of like, you know, I don't know what the statue is, but it's a statue that's got the blindfold on. I think it's kind of referencing that. But I mean, maybe it's a thing of like, it also could be a thing of like, it could be representative of not just what is your price before, you know, to make justice turn a blind eye. It could be a thing of how much will it pay for you to finally not like be so caught up in it, like, you know, because there's, you know, I'm sure there's also a class system in Gotham, because there's the rich and they're the really extreme rich, and then there's the poor. So maybe it's a thing of like the poor kind of get it harder than the rich, because the rich are, so like, how much is it going to take for you to have blind justice, so that the fact of the matter is a person's social class won't be enough for you for that to be, you know, a factor in everything. You know, I feel like that's another way. The two can kind of go hand in hand, but like, that's just how I feel like that line could be taken. But like, for Riddler to kind of be standing up like that makes you immediately think like he hasn't been personally affected by the class system that is basically Gotham. Obviously we get peaks at, I mean, that's a big part of obviously Joker as well, you know, so we see those elements. I mean, once again, I think it's a big part of any, you know, potential Batman story is obviously the corruption of Gotham, but I'm assuming like his parent, I mean, that could be an interesting parallel they could make, where they make it so that Riddler literally went through the same thing that Batman did, and it's a thing of like, there could be two sides of the same coin, like similar things forged him into different things. Bruce became Batman, Ed became the Riddler. That could be the situation, you know? I think that'd be kind of an interesting thing too. And there's also like that line at the end, which I thought was kind of fascinating, where it's like, I'm assuming it's Riddler, maybe I'm mistaken, but he's like, you know, you're a part of this. And Bruce is like, how am I a part of this? He's like, you'll find out soon enough. Like, that might not have been Riddler, maybe that was someone else. But my thought then immediately was like, are we going down the Court of Owls type of lane? Once again, I will always state this, I am not well versed in comic books. My only experience with the Court of Owls is through Gotham, and obviously the TV show Gotham, love it or hate it. Obviously I'm someone who really, really dug Gotham, but I know not everyone felt that way. The fact of the matter is, a lot of that is very different, you know, than I'm sure, than a lot of things. But I mean, to be fair, it's like, that's comic books in general, because like comic books change continuity all the time, or at least remix certain things, depending on who's writing and who's doing it. Like, you know, people kind of do their own thing, so it's like Gotham is like, you treat it like a comic book. You take the mythos that is Batman and Gotham, and you kind of do your own thing with it, kind of remixing stuff here and there. But obviously it's like, the Court of Owls is connected to the hierarchy, like, they are obviously the secret society that kind of runs a lot of stuff in Gotham, and the fact of the matter is that they, you know, obviously, you know, the Waynes have a direct correlation to them, you know, at least, you know, based on Gotham. But it could just even be the thing of like, because, you know, Gotham has its founding members, so even if you're not going down the Court of Owls direction, it could just purely be like, oh, your family is connected to corruption. Obviously that's been something that's been tackled in different things before. One great example of that would be like the Telltale Batman game, which I think that season 1 and season 2 are great. I think they are really good Batman stories. You know, they're kind of up there with kind of being my favorite Batman stories, but regardless, because like I said, this is something even like Gotham touches on as well. But the fact of the matter is, it's like, oh, your family did some like effed up stuff, and I'm wondering, will that tie into the Court of Owls? Because once again, it's been a while, so I don't remember, because I know that like Bruce had direct family connected to the Court of Owls. I don't know if that's typically how it goes down in the comic books. Like, is like the founding members and the Court of Owls always the same thing, or are they sometimes the same thing, sometimes not? I think they're connected. Like I said, it's been a while, so I could be wrong and mistaken on a lot of this, but it's just, like I said, it's just something that's kind of flowing in the back of my head. Even now that I'm sitting here talking about, like, you know, about a Court of Owls origins, it's like, I'm sure Riddler could have a very different origin, because I don't know if what I'm saying for him in this movie, like maybe he kind of went through a very similar situation to Bruce. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be true to who he is in the comic books. And once again, everyone can do their own interpretation, remix their own version, you know, of Gotham. Either way, I think that's the direction this could be going down, because I doubt it's going to be like a Court of Owls immediately. It might be a thing where like potentially it's like they set it up at the very end of the movie. It's like, oh, like this is the Court of Owls kind of get introduced, and that becomes a bigger plot throughout the other movies potentially, because supposedly, you know, it might, you know, Matt Reeves is going to make a trilogy of Batman movies, but you know, that to me, obviously this is my brain thinking like well in advance. It's like, oh, we're thinking kind of like too far ahead. It's like, let's kind of just focus on this movie, you know, for now. But I think that would be interesting, you know, kind of turning, you know, I don't know if the Riddler is always this, but like having him be this anti-hero where Bruce has to face off against someone where it's like, he's a bad guy, he's murdering people, I've got to stop him. But it's like, yeah, he's trying to bring his own form of justice, expose the darkness that is Gotham. So it's like, it puts you in this complicated nature, because like you're trying to stop all evil. It's like, yeah, he's doing evil, but at the same time it's like you yourself, depending on how they go about the story, it's like your family might be connected to it, so it burns, like, you know, the tragedy of losing your parents, but then it's like, wait, my parents aren't who I thought. Like, that's always such an interesting turn to his story. It's like these people who their murder changed him, you know, they made him into the man that he is now. Like, everything was a byproduct of losing them. It created him to put him in this position where he wanted to get justice for them and make this city a better place in their name. And for that foundation of who he became to be unraveled by being like, oh, your parents weren't the good people that you thought they were. Because even Pennyworth, the Alfred, you know, TV show on Epix, kind of, you know, remixes some things about both his mom and his dad, them being a part of some things. Of like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know they have such a complicated history and past. Obviously, you know, even deeper than, you know, what you may have kind of gotten from something like Gotham, for example. So I think that's such an interesting thing. Like I said, especially if they go with the angle of making them like two sides to the same coin, that basically similar events forged them down different paths, you know, and having to confront like, hey, maybe the Riddler is kind of like me. Like maybe even making, you know, Bruce questioning like, am I really on the right side of things? Am I like, if circumstances were even a little bit different, you know, maybe Ed came from a poorer family and you know, Bruce comes from, you know, a higher class, you know, social class family of being from the Waynes, because the Waynes are like filthy, stupid rich. And I'm also curious like how they're going to adjust like, you know, the wealth, because obviously some stuff has them as millionaires, other stuff has them as billionaires, because I'm sure it also plays into like what time frame this plays in. Because I even talked about this before. It's a line from Batman Arkham City where Vicky Vale is talking. She's like, millionaire Bruce Wayne, and Bruce walks by. He's like, Vicky, it's billionaire, not millionaire. Millionaires are so last year. Like, that's why I'm curious. Because also like, because it's the movie seems like it takes place in an ambiguous time, because some people are like, oh, maybe the 80s, maybe the 70s, when before, like it way before now, like people were guessing and wondering what the movie was going to take place in. But at one point someone points out, when you see him beat up like that goon, someone is filming it on a phone, so it seems like it's taking place modern day. But this is something I never really thought too much about until people had pointed it out to me as I got older. It's like, when you look back at the animated series, it takes place in a very ambiguous time frame, because you have like blimps up in the sky like very casually. It seems like it takes place modern day, but then has like some old school aspects to it that certain people were pointing out. So it takes place in a very ambiguous time, so maybe this Gotham City is going to be the same way, you know. So but regardless, circling back to the point I was making before I went on that huge tangent, is the fact of the matter is, like, you know, Bruce coming, like I said, coming to terms with, like, you know, things turning out the way they did because he came from a wealthy family. And the fact of the matter is that maybe Gotham is partially the way it is because his family played its own role in it. But like I said, if he came from like this wealthy background and maybe Ed didn't, or maybe they do the thing where Ed does come from a wealthy background, because it also depends on what they're going to do with Cobblepot, because typically he comes from a pretty wealthy off family too. That's where a lot of his wealth comes from. And do they make it so he did, you know, come from wealth and then he lost it all, or does he still have it, he just decided to go to crime? Like, there's a lot to kind of be explained about the world of Gotham, and I'm curious to kind of figure out how what part everyone plays. Because I've said it before, making it seem like, oh, the Riddler might be going up against the Court of Owls. Maybe he's being manipulated by the Court of Owls to do what he's doing. A great example too, another thing to consider too is what Mark said on Fat Man Beyond. He kind of suggested kind of like the Gotham situation where a lot of people kind of made the same, I myself amongst other people made the same thing about the Joker, like saying that Joaquin Phoenix's Joker might not actually be the Joker that we know that eventually clashes with Batman. He might be the person who ends up inspiring the future Joker, the Joker that we may know. So maybe that's the same thing in Riddler's case, that maybe this isn't the Riddler we know, maybe this is a person who inspires the Riddler. It's kind of what Mark was going, and I always think that's such an interesting, you know, take. That's what I always thought was kind of interesting about Gotham, because they kind of did a similar thing with the Joker character as well. Obviously, they remixed and kind of did their own thing with it. You know, obviously, if you haven't seen Gotham, I won't spoil it, but it's a whole thing. Then there's also the angle to think about, you know, what role will Selena Kyle play in this? Obviously, we know nothing. We just got introduced to her a little bit in the teaser and everything, but it's like, you know, where did her and Batman, you know, is it just kind of like Batman coming across this random thief? Because, you know, it's like, you know, is she just someone, you know, that like she's just a small bit player in like a bigger game that's going on? Is what I'm curious about. Is she just, like I said, some random thief that he comes across, or is it a situation where, you know, she has her own partner? Because obviously that's always the beautiful relationship about them. Like, yes, there's chemistry, and yes, they can be allies, but obviously they're enemies. There's always a back and forth. There's always the cat and mouse, or rather cat and bat aspect to their relationship, where it's like, hey, you're this thief, but maybe it's like, oh, he finds her interesting because she it's always been someone that kind of sees Bruce for who he really is. She sees past everything. She kind of sees through him. Oh, in a way I feel like no other character kind of can sometimes. So it depends on like how they end up playing with that dynamic of their relationship, whether it's you know, are you just some thief that I stopped but couldn't, like I crossed paths with, but it's like, oh, you outsmarted me, you got away, and he finds her intriguing. Does she, you know, it depends on how they handle that whole situation. And you know, whether there's a situation of like they play into that where it's like, oh, she works with the bad guys, you know, it's like, oh, I help you from time to time while secretly I'm double crossing you and work, because it's like, I don't care who I'm working with, all I care about is looking out for myself. You end up paying the price sometimes because you trust me when you shouldn't. Like, I love that aspect of their relationship. So I, you know, like I said, there's not much we know at this point in time, but I'm really curious to see how they end up playing with their relationship and their dynamic, you know, in the grand scheme of things. So obviously, this is a whole bunch of stuff randomly that's been popping in my head that I felt like I might as well make a full video kind of discussing this and sharing my thoughts with you guys. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you agree with a lot of the stuff I brought up? Do you disagree? What are your own thoughts about a lot of this stuff? Let me know in the comments down below. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.